Okay, so this video is just going to be me reading out information about the very interesting artist Roger Waters. Okay, so just to get this off of the ground, this is my favorite of the Pink Floyd albums. It's one of my absolute favorite albums in general, and I'm impressed and in awe of it musically, and I think conceptually it's one of the better realized works of 20th century art. I'll put it like this: like, it's better than Animal Farm. Animal Farm is just kind of obvious and try. It's like, oh, Stalinism bad. It's just metaphors of farm animals. It's kind of cute, but actually, Orwell didn't set his sights to his own nation's ills, and no one would ever accuse Pink Floyd of being communists. Roger was angry that the Britain that his father's generation had fought for had been destroyed by the evils of big business and capital over the course of the post-war decades. Even Christianity had been thrown aside in favour of the dollar and the subservience to the American Empire. After all, the only way the British Empire could continue after the Second World War was acting as a little vassal state for the Americans. So anyway, let's go through this. Feel free to turn off this video if you're not interested, dislike, unsubscribe, do whatever you need to do. This is just for people who want to learn and would prefer to listen to this than to actually read it, because maybe I assume this can be just used as a quick little podcast for people, essentially, as you're painting your house or something. I don't know. It's what I listen to podcasts for, stuff like that. No, I don't paint it. It's like a unit. Like, it's not mine. But whatever. George Roger Waters, born 6 September 1943, is an English musician, singer-songwriter, and composer. In 1965, he co-founded the progressive rock band Pink Floyd as the bassist. Following the departure of singer-songwriter Syd Barrett in 1968, Waters also became the band's lyricist, co-lead vocalist, and conceptual leader until his departure in 1985. Pink Floyd achieved international success with the concept albums The Dark Side of the Moon 1973, Wish You Were Here 1975, Animals 1977, The Wall 1979, and The Final Cut 1983. By the early 1980s, they had become one of the most critically acclaimed and commercially successful groups in popular music. Amid creative differences, Waters left in 1985 and began a legal dispute over the use of the band's name and material. They settled out of court in 1987. Waters' solo work includes the studio albums The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking 1984, Radio KAOS 1987, Amused to Death 1992, and Is This the Life We Really Want 2017. In 2005, he released Ka Aira, an opera translated from Etienne and Nadine Rodagil's libretto about the French Revolution. In 1990, Waters staged one of the largest rock concerts in history, The Wall, live in Berlin, with an attendance of 450,000. As a member of Pink Floyd, he was inducted into the US Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1996 and the UK Music Hall of Fame in 2005. Later that year, he reunited with Pink Floyd for the Live 8 Global Awareness event, the group's only appearance with Waters since 1981. He has toured extensively as a solo act since 1999. He performed The Dark Side of the Moon in its entirety for his world tour of 2006 to 2008, and the Wall live tour of 2010 to 2013 was the highest grossing tour by a solo artist at the time. Waters incorporates political themes in his work and has drawn controversy for his views. He is a supporter of Palestine and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, likening the treatment of Palestine by Israel to Nazi Germany, and has been accused of anti-Semitism by organizations including the Anti-Defamation League, which he denies. Okay, this is maybe controversial for some. We're going to keep going through this, and I'm not going to include too many asides. I'm going to try and stay as neutral as possible. Although, one thing that's going to remain I'm going to try and keep consistent about is I'm not going to try and claim to read Roger Waters' mind. I think it's a bit ridiculous to attempt to do so. Fair assessments and judgments can be made of people, I feel, based upon their actions, sometimes their statements, but upon what we just presume that they're thinking, I just don't think it's enough, to be honest. Waters was born on the 6th of September 1943, the younger of two boys, to Mary Nee White, 1913 to 2009, and Eric Fletcher Waters, 1914 to 1944, in Great Bookham, Surrey. His father, the son of a coal miner and Labour Party activist, was a schoolteacher, a devout Christian, and a Communist Party member. In the early years of the Second World War, Waters' father was a conscientious objector who drove an ambulance during the Blitz. He later changed his stance on pacifism, joining the Territorial Army, and was commissioned into the 8th Battalion, Royal Fusiliers, and as a second lieutenant on 11th of September 1943. He was killed 5 months later on 18th of February 1944 at Aprila during the Battle of Anzio, when Roger was 5 months old. He is commemorated in Aprila and at the Casino War Cemetery. On the 18th of February 2014, Waters unveiled a monument to his father and other war casualties in Aprila, Italy, and was made an honorary citizen of Anzio. Following her husband's death, Mary Waters, also a teacher, moved with her 2 sons to Cambridge and raised from there. Waters' earliest memory is of the VJ Day celebrations. Waters attended Morley Memorial Junior School in Cambridge and then the Cambridge High School for Boys, now Hills Road Sixth Form College, with Syd Barrett. The future Pink Floyd guitarist David Gilmour lived nearby on Mill Road and attended the Perse School. At 15, Waters was chairman of the Cambridge Youth Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, YCND, having designed its publicity poster and participated in its organisation. He was a keen sportsman and a highly regarded member of the high school's cricket and rugby teams. Waters was unhappy at school, saying, "I hated every second of it, apart from games. The regime at school was a very oppressive one. The same kids who are susceptible to bullying by other kids are also susceptible to bullying by the teachers." Waters met the future Pink Floyd members Nick Mason and Richard Wright in London, at the Regent Street Polytechnic, later the University of Westminster, School of Architecture. Waters enrolled there in 1962 after a series of aptitude tests indicated he was well suited to that field. He had initially considered a career in mechanical engineering. By September 1963, Waters and Mason had lost interest in their studies and moved into the lower flat of Stanhope Gardens, owned by Mike Leonard, a part-time tutor at the Regent Street Polytechnic. Waters, Mason and Wright first played music together in late 1963 in a band formed by vocalist Keith Noble and bassist Clive Metcalf. They usually called themselves Sigma Six, but also used the name the Megadeths. Waters played rhythm guitar and Mason played drums. Wright played any keyboard he could arrange to use, and Noble's sister Sheila provided occasional vocals. In the early years, the band performed during private functions and rehearsed in a tea room in the basement of Regent Street Polytechnic. When Metcalf and Noble left to form their own group in September 1963, the remaining members asked Barrett and the guitarist Bob Close to join. Waters switched then to the bass. By January 1964, the group became known as the Abdabs or the Screaming Abdabs. During late 1964, the band used the name Leonard's Lodges, Spectrum 5, and eventually the T-Set. In late 1965, the T-Set had changed their name to the Pink Floyd Sound, later the Pink Floyd Blues Band, and by early 1966, Pink Floyd. By early 1966, Barrett was Pink Floyd's frontman, guitarist, and songwriter. He wrote or co-wrote all but one track of their debut LP, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, released in August 1967. Waters contributed the song Take Up Thy Stethoscope and Walk, his first sole writing credit, to the album. Brilliant song, definitely. By late 1967, Barrett's deteriorating mental health and increasingly erratic behaviour rendered him unable or unwilling to continue in his capacity as Pink Floyd's singer-songwriter and lead guitarist. In early March 1968, they discussed the band's future. Barrett, Mason, Waters and Wright met with the band's managers Peter Jenner and Andrew King of the rock music management company they had all founded, Black Hill Enterprises. Barrett agreed to leave Pink Floyd, and the band agreed to Black Hill's entitlement in perpetuity regarding past activities. Their new manager, Steve O'Rourke, made a formal announcement about the departure of Barrett and the arrival of Gilmour in April 1968. After Barrett's departure in March 1968, Waters began to chart Pink Floyd's artistic direction. In 1970, he composed, in collaboration with Ron Geeson, music from The Body, a soundtrack for Roy Battersby's documentary The Body. Waters said he wanted to drag Pink Floyd kicking and screaming back from the borders of space, from the whimsy that Sid was into, to my concerns, which are much more political and philosophical. He became a dominant songwriter and the band's principal lyricist, sharing lead vocals with Gilmour and sometimes Wright. Throughout the late 1970s, he was the band's dominant creative figure until his departure in 1985. He wrote most of the lyrics to the 5 Pink Floyd albums preceding his departure, starting with The Dark Side of the Moon 1973 and ending with The Final Cut 1983, while exerting progressively more creative control. Every Waters studio album from The Dark Side of the Moon onwards has been a concept album. With lyrics entirely by Waters, The Dark Side of the Moon is one of the most successful rock albums ever. It spent 736 consecutive weeks on the Billboard 200 chart until July 1988 and sold over 40 million copies worldwide. As of 2005, it continued to sell over 8,000 copies a week. According to Pink Floyd biographer Glenn Povey, The Dark Side of the Moon is the world's second best-selling album and the United States' 21st best-selling album. In 2006, asked if he felt his goals for Dark Side had been accomplished, Waters said, "When the record was finished, I took a reel-to-reel copy home with me, and I remember playing it for my wife then, and I remember her bursting into tears when it was finished, and I thought, this has obviously struck a chord somewhere, and I was kind of pleased by that. You know when you've done something, certainly if you create a piece of music, then you then hear it with fresh ears when you play it for somebody else. And at that point I thought to myself, wow, this is a pretty complete piece of work, and I had every confidence that people would respond to it." Waters' thematic ideas became the impetus for the concept albums of Dark Side of the Moon 1973, Wish You Were Here 1975, Animals 1977, and The Wall 1979, written largely by Waters, and The Final Cut 1983, written entirely by him. The cost of war and the loss of his father became a recurring theme, from Corporal Clegg, A Saucer Full of Secrets 1968, and Free 4, Obscured by Clouds 1972, to Us and Them from the Dark Side of the Moon, When the Tigers Broke Free, first used in the feature film The Wall 1982, later included with the Fletcher Memorial Home on The Final Cut, an album dedicated to his father. The theme and composition of The Wall was influenced by his upbringing in an English society depleted of men after the Second World War. The Wall, written almost entirely by Waters, is largely based on his life story. Having sold over 23 million RIAA certified units in the US as of 2013, is tied for 6th most certified album of all time in America. Pink Floyd hired Bob Ezrin to co-produce the album and cartoonist Gerald Scarfe to illustrate the sleeve art. They embarked on the Wall tour of Los Angeles, New York, London, and Dortmund. The last Pink Floyd performance of the Wall was on 17th of June 1981 at Earl's Court, London, and this was Pink Floyd's last appearance of Waters until the band's brief reunion at 2nd of July 2005 Live 8 concert in London's Hyde Park 24 years later. In March 1983, the last Pink Floyd album with Waters, The Final Cut, was released. It was subtitled A Requiem for the Post-War Dream by Roger Waters, performed by Pink Floyd. Waters wrote all the album's lyrics and music. His lyrics were critical of the Conservative Party government of the day and mentioned Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher by name. At the time, Gilmour did not have any new material, so he asked Waters to delay the recording until he could write some songs, but Waters refused. According to Mason, after power struggles within the band and creative arguments about the album, Gilmour's name disappeared from the production credits, though he retained his pay. Rolling Stone magazine gave the album 5 stars, with Kurt Loder describing it as superlative achievement and art rock's crowning masterpiece. Loder viewed the work as essentially a Roger Waters solo album. Amidst creative differences, Waters left Pink Floyd in 1985 and began a legal battle with the band regarding their continued use of the name and material. In December 1985, Waters issued a statement to EMI and CBS invoking the leaving member clause in his contract. In October 1986, he initiated high court proceedings to formally dissolve the Pink Floyd partnership. In his submission to the High Court, he called Pink Floyd a spent force creatively. Gilmour and Mason opposed the application and announced their intention to continue as Pink Floyd. Waters said he had been forced to resign like Barrett had been years earlier, and decided to leave Pink Floyd based on legal considerations, saying if I hadn't, the financial repercussions would have wiped me out completely. Waters did not want the band to use the name Pink Floyd without him. He said later, "I would be distressed if Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr made records and went on the road calling themselves the Beatles. If John Lennon's not in it, it's sacrilegious. To continue with Gilmour and Mason, getting in a whole bunch of other people to write the material seems to me an insult to the work that came before." In December 1987, Waters and Pink Floyd reached an agreement. Waters was released from his contractual obligation with O'Rourke, and he retained the copyrights to the Wall concept and the inflatable Animals pig. Pink Floyd released the 3 studio albums without him. A Momentary Lapse of Reason 1987, The Division Bell 1994, and The Endless River 2014. According to a 1999 interview with Gilmour, Waters declined an invitation to perform The Dark Side of the Moon with Pink Floyd at Earl's Court, London. In 2005, Waters said the period of his departure had been a bad, negative time, that he regretted his part in the negativity. "Why should I have imposed my feeling about the work and what it was worth on the others if they didn't feel the same? I was wrong in attempting to do that." In 2013, Waters said he regretted the lawsuit and had failed to appreciate that the Pink Floyd name had commercial value independent of the band members. In 1984, Waters released his first solo album, The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking, which dealt with Waters' feelings about monogamy and family life versus the call of the wild. The protagonist, Reg, finally chooses love and matrimony over promiscuity. The album featured guitarist Eric Clapton, jazz saxophonist David Sanborn, and artwork by Gerald Scarfe. Kurt Loder described The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking as a strangely static, faintly hideous record. Rolling Stone rated the album a rock bottom 1 star. Years later, Mike DeGagny of AllMusic praised its ingenious symbolism and brilliant use of stream of consciousness of an inner subconscious realm, rating it 4 out of 5. I have to admit, I'm not a big fan of the album personally, but we'll move on. My opinion's irrelevant. It's whatever. Waters toured the album with Clapton, a new band, and new material. The shows included a selection of Pink Floyd songs. Waters debuted his tour in Stockholm on 16th of June 1984. The tour drew poor ticket sales and some performances at larger venues were cancelled. Waters estimated that he lost £400,000 on the tour. In March 1985, Waters went to North America to play smaller venues with the pros and cons plus some old Pink Floyd stuff. North America Tour 1985. The pros and cons of hitchhiking has been certified gold by the RIAA. In 1986, Waters contributed songs and a score to the soundtrack of the animated film When the Wind Blows. Great film, brutally depressing, based on the Raymond Briggs book of the same name. His backing band, featuring Paul Carrack, was credited as the Bleeding Heart Band. In 1987, Waters released Radio KAOS, a concept album based on a mute man named Billy from an impoverished Welsh mining town who has the ability to physically tune into radio waves in his head. Billy learns to communicate with a radio DJ, and eventually to control the world's computers. Angry at the state of the world in which he lives, he simulates a nuclear attack. Waters followed the release of a supporting tour also in 1987. I have to admit, I really like Radio Chaos. It's I know some people call it a silly rock concept album and like rock opera, like too chorusy, chanty, but I don't know, I like it, it's fun. I think it's invigorating. In November 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and in July 1990, Waters staged one of the largest and most elaborate rock concerts in history, The Wall, live in Berlin, on the vacant terrain between Potsdamer Platz and the Brandenburg Gate. The show reported an attendance of 200,000, though some estimates are as much as twice that, with approximately 1 billion television viewers. Leonard Cheshire asked Waters to perform the concert to raise funds for charity. Waters' musicians included Joni Mitchell, Van Morrison, Cyndi Lauper, Bryan Adams, Scorpions, and Sinead O'Connor. Waters also used an East German symphony orchestra and choir, a Soviet marching band, and a pair of helicopters from the US 7th Airborne Command and Control Squadron. Designed by Mark Fisher, not our Mark Fisher, the wall was 25 meters tall and 170 meters long and was built across the set, and Scarf's inflatable puppets were recreated on an enlarged scale. Many rock icons received invitations to the show, though Gilmour, Mason, and Wright did not. Waters released a double album of the performance, which has been certified platinum by the RIAA. I don't really go in for live albums that much personally, and that's not really one of them. I can't be bothered, honestly. I don't have the motivation or want to I feel like listening to that, Yeah. Like, I've tried, it just doesn't happen. Seriously, whatever. In 1990, Waters hired manager Mark Fenwick and left EMI for a worldwide deal with Columbia. He released his third studio album, Amused to Death, in 1992. The record was influenced heavily by the events of the Tiananmen Square protests of 1989 and the Gulf War, and a critique of the notion of war becoming the subject of entertainment, particularly on television. The title was derived from the book Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. Patrick Leonard, who worked on A Momentary Lapse of Reason, co-produced the album. Jeff Beck played lead guitar on many of the album's tracks, which were recorded with a cast of musicians at 10 different recording studios. It is Waters' most critically acclaimed solo recording, garnering comparison to his work with Pink Floyd. Waters described the record as a stunning piece of work, ranking it alongside The Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall as one of the best of his career. I happen to think Amused to Death is an absolutely extraordinary album, proof that Roger Waters can produce absolutely genius work outside of the Pink Floyd name. It really is. Anyway, the song What God Wants Part 1 reached number 35 in the UK in September 1992 and number 5 on Billboard's mainstream rock tracks charts in the US. Amused to Death was certified silver by the British phonographic industry. Sales of Amused to Death topped out at around 1 million, and there was no tour in support of the album. Waters would first perform material from it 7 years later during his In the Flesh tour. In 1996, Waters was inducted into the US and UK Rock and Roll Halls of Fame as a member of Pink Floyd. In 1999, after a 12-year hiatus from touring and a 7-year absence from the music industry, Waters embarked on the In the Flesh tour, performing both solo and Pink Floyd material. The tour was a financial success in the US. Though Waters had booked mostly smaller venues, tickets sold so well that many of the concerts were upgraded to larger ones. The tour eventually stretched across the world and spanned 3 years. The concert film was released on CD and DVD, In the Flesh, live. During the tour, Waters played 2 new songs, Flickering Flame and Each Small Candle, as the final encore to many of the shows. In June 2002, he completed the tour with a performance in front of 70,000 people at the Glastonbury Festival of Performing Arts, playing 15 Pink Floyd songs and 5 songs from his solo catalogue. Miramax announced in 2004 that a production of The Wall was to appear on Broadway, with Waters playing a prominent role in the creative direction. Reports stated that the musical contained not only the original tracks from The Wall, but also songs from Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and other Pink Floyd albums, as well as new material. On the night of 1st of May 2004, recorded extracts from the opera, including its overture, were played on the occasion of the Welcome Europe celebrations in the accession country of Malta. Gert Hoff mixed recorded excerpts from the opera into a continuous piece of music, which is played as an accompaniment to a large light and fireworks display over Grand Harbour in Valletta. In July 2004, Waters released 2 new tracks online, To Kill the Child, inspired by the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and Leaving Beirut, an anti-war song inspired by his travels in the Middle East as a teenager. Wow. That would have been very formative on one. That would have been what, in the 40s, 50s? 50s and early 60s, yeah, no, it's good stuff. Wow. In July 2005, Waters reunited with Mason, Wright and Gilmour for their final performance together at the 2005 Live 8 concert in London's Hyde Park, Pink Floyd's only appearance with Waters since their final performance of The Wall at Earls Court, London 24 years earlier. The AOE played a 23-minute set consisting of Speak to Me /Breathe Reprise, Money, Wish You Were Here and Comfortably Numb. Waters told the Associated Press that while the experience of playing with Pink Floyd again was positive, the chances of a bona fide reunion would be slight considering his and Gilmour's continuing musical and ideological differences. Though Waters had differing ideas about which songs they should play, he agreed to roll over for one night only. In November 2005, Pink Floyd were inducted into the UK Music Hall of Fame by Pete Townshend of The Who. In September 2005, Waters released Ça Ira, French for It Will Be Fine. From Waters added the subtitle There Is Hope, an opera in 3 acts translated from the late Etienne Rodargil's French libretto based on the historical subject of the French Revolution. Ça Ira was released as a double CD album featuring baritone Bryn Terfel, soprano Ying Huang, and tenor Paul Groves. Set during the early French Revolution, the original libretto was co-written in French by Rodargil and his wife Nadine Dalahaye. Waters had begun rewriting the libretto in English in 1989 and said about the composition, I've always been a big fan of Beethoven's choral music, Berlioz and Borodin. This is unashamedly romantic and resides in that early 19th century tradition because that's where my tastes lie in classical and choral music. Waters appeared on television to discuss the opera, but the interviews often focused on his relationship with Pink Floyd, something Waters would take in stride. A signed Pink Floyd biographer Mark Blake believes is a testament to his mellower old age with 20 years of dedicated psychotherapy. Ça Ira reached number 5 on the Billboard Classical Music chart in the United States. In June 2006, Waters began the 2-year Dark Side of the Moon live world tour. The first half of the show featured both Pink Floyd songs and Waters' solo material. The second included a complete performance of The Dark Side of the Moon, the first time in more than 3 decades that Waters had performed it. The shows ended with an encore from the third side of the wall. The elaborate staging by the concert lighting designer Mark Brickman included laser lights, fog machines, pyrotechnics, psychedelic projections, and inflatable floating puppets, Spaceman and Pig, controlled by a handler dressed as a butcher, and a full 360-degree quadraphonic sound system. Mason joined Waters for the Dark Side of the Moon set and the encores of some 2006 performances. March 2007, the Waters song Hello, I Love You featured in the science fiction film The Last Mimsy. I remember Hello, I Love You without the brackets as a song by The Doors, which is very similar to All of the Day, All of the Night by the Kinks. Anyway, Waters released it as a single on CD and via download and described it as a song that captures the themes of the movie, the clash between humanity's best and worst instincts, and how a child's innocence can win the day. He performed at California's Coachella Festival in April 2008 and was to be among the headlining artists at Live Earth 2008 in Mumbai, India in December 2008, but the concert was cancelled following the 26th of November terrorist attacks in Mumbai. In April 2008, Waters discussed a possible new album with the tentative title name Heartland. In June 2010, Waters released a cover of We Shall Overcome, a protest song rewritten and arranged by Guy Carawan and Pete Seeger. He performed with Gilmour at the Hoping Foundation benefit event in July 2010. The set comprised a cover of the Phil Spector song To Know Him Is To Love Him, which is played in early Pink Floyd soundchecks, followed by Wish You Were Here, Comfortably Numb, and Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. In September 2010, Waters began the Wall Live Tour, an updated version of the original Pink Floyd tour featuring a complete performance of The Wall. Waters said the tour would likely be his last. I'm not as young as I used to be. I'm not like B.B. King or Muddy Waters. I'm not a great vocalist or a great instrumentalist or whatever, but I still have the fire in my belly, and I have something to say. I have a swan song in me, and I think this will probably be it. At the O2 Arena in London in On the 12th of May 2011, Gilmour and Mason again performed with Waters on Comfortably Numb and Outside the Wall. For the first half of 2012, the tour topped worldwide concert ticket sales, having sold more than 1.4 million tickets globally. By 2013, The Wall Live had become the highest-grossing tour by a solo artist. Waters performed at the Concert for Sandy Relief in Madison Square Garden on the 12th of December 2012. On 24th of July 2015, he headlined the Newport Folk Festival in Newport, Rhode Island, accompanied by the band My Morning Jacket, oh great stuff, and two singers from the group Lucius. Waters performed at the Desert Trip Festival in October 2016. Waters released his first solo album in nearly 25 years, Is This the Life We Really Want, on the 2nd of June 2017. It was produced by the Radiohead producer Nigel Godrich. Great stuff. Godrich was a fan of Waters' work of Pink Floyd, but was critical of his solo work, and encouraged him to make a concise album showcasing his lyrics. Godrich, well, the results, look, Waters returned to North America 2017 with the Us Plus Them tour performing Pink Floyd and solo material. Well, it didn't work out well, because I don't think this album's very good. It's too much of a... Roger Waters, it's like... if the point of the art is to be like a didactic statement, just release a didactic statement. The art's just to make the statement more appealing, and that's... I mean, it's just a distraction from the statement then, really. I don't know, that's just my opinion. I might be wrong, I don't care. On 26th October 2018, Sony Classical Masterworks released an adaptation of Igor Stravinsky's theatrical work The Soldier's Tale, narrated by Waters. On the 18th of April 2019, Waters joined Nick Mason's Saucerful of Secrets on stage at the Beacon Theatre to sing Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. What a classic number. Waters is one of the 10 highest-grossing concert acts of the decade. In January 2020, Waters announced a new arena tour, This Is Not a Drill, that would tour North America and finish 1 month before the 2020 presidential election. The tour is rescheduled to 2022 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The concerts were held from July to October 2022 and expanded with dates in Europe from March to June 2023. In 2021, Waters said he had begun writing a memoir during the pandemic. In December 2022, he released an EP, The Lockdown Sessions, comprising 6 new versions of songs from his solo career in Pink Floyd. Waters continued to quarrel with Gilmour. In 2021, Waters wrote publicly of their disputes over Pink Floyd reissues and credits, accusing Gilmour of distorting the truth, and complained that Gilmour would not allow him to use Pink Floyd's website and social media channels. Rolling Stone noted that Waters and Gilmour seemed to have hit yet another low point in their relationship. In early 2023, Waters gave an interview in which he refused to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine and criticized Pink Floyd's 2022 track Hey Hey Rise Up, which was released in support of Ukraine. Shortly afterwards, Polly Sampson, the wife of Gilmour and a lyricist for Pink Floyd, wrote on Twitter that Waters was anti-Semitic and a lying, thieving, hypocritical, tax-avoiding, lip-syncing, misogynistic, sick-with-envy megalomaniac. Gilmour responded to the tweet on Twitter, every word demonstrably true. Waters released a statement on Twitter saying he was aware of the incendiary and wildly inaccurate comments from Sampson and was taking advice as to his position. In the same month, Waters announced that he had recorded a new version of The Dark Side of the Moon, scheduled for release later in the year. It features spoken word sections and no guitar solos, to bring out the heart and soul of the album musically and spiritually. How provocative, oh boy. In an interview with the Daily Telegraph, Waters insisted that while the other members of Pink Floyd had contributed to the original album, it's my project and I wrote it. Let's get rid of all this we crap. Oh, that's a bit of a... taken out of context, that's a very nasty statement. He said the other members could not write songs, had nothing to say, and were not artists. Man. This is the stuff that bothers me. Whatever. And some other stuff to an extent. Let's go through this. Waters supports Palestine in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He's a supporter of Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions BDS, a campaign for an international cultural boycott of Israel. Waters first saw the Israeli West Bank barrier in 2006 at the request of Palestinian supporters when he was scheduled to perform in Tel Aviv. He subsequently moved a Tel Aviv concert to Neve Shalom and has criticized the barrier. In 2013, Rabbi Abraham Cooper, the Associate Dean of the Jewish human rights organization the Simon Wiesenthal Center, accused Waters of anti-Semitism for including a giant pig balloon bearing a Star of David in his concerts. Waters responded that it was one of several religious and political symbols in the show and not an attempt to single out Judaism as an evil force. Later that year, Waters compared the Israeli treatment of Palestinians to Nazi Germany, saying the parallels with what went on in the 1930s in Germany are so crushingly obvious. He said the reason why a few celebrities had joined the BDS movement in the United States was because the Jewish lobby is extraordinarily powerful here, and particularly in the industry that I work in, the music industry. Those statements are very, very fiery. Following the remarks of the Anti-Defamation League said that Waters is anti-Semitic, the American rabbi Shmuley Botich responded to Waters in the New York Observer, "That you would have the audacity to compare Jews to monsters who murdered them shows you have no decency, you have no heart, you have no soul." Speaking in New York afterwards, Waters said supporters of Israel often attack critics as anti-Semitic as a diversionary tactic. In 2015, Waters published an open letter in Salon criticizing the rock band Bon Jovi for performing in Tel Aviv. Bon Jovi are terrible in general, to be fair. In 2017, he urged Radiohead to cancel a concert there, signing a letter with 50 others, and was co-signatory on an open letter asking Nick Cave to cancel his. Neither Radiohead nor Cave cancelled their concerts. Waters narrated the 2016 documentary The Occupation of the American Mind, Israel's public relations war in the United States, about the methods used by Israel to shape American public opinion. Yeah, this doesn't necessarily reflect the opinions of the uploader, by the way. In a 2017 interview with Omar Barghouti, I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, perhaps, Waters again likened Israel's public diplomacy to Nazi Germany. The thing about propaganda, again, it's not hard to go back to Goebbels or the 1930s. You understand the tactic is to tell the big lie as often as possible, over and over and over and over again, and people believe it. In 2017, the writer Ian Halperin produced a documentary, Wish You Weren't Here, accusing Waters of anti-Semitism and erecting the very walls that hinder peace in the region and fuel hatred. I've not seen that documentary. I don't know much about it at all, to be honest. In 2020, Major League Baseball stopped advertising Waters' "This Is Not a Drill" concerts after receiving criticism from Jewish advocacy groups. Later that year, Waters said the American Jewish businessman and Republican Party donator Sheldon Adelson was a puppet master controlling American politics. He said that Adelson believed that only Jewish people are completely human. I'm not saying Jewish people believe this. I'm saying that he does, and he's pulling the strings. In the same interview, Waters said that the murder of George Floyd was carried out with a technique developed by the Israeli Defense Forces. He said the Americans had studied the technique to learn how to murder the blacks because they had seen how efficient the Israelis have been at murdering Palestinians in the occupied territories by using those techniques. The Israelis are proud of it. The comments were criticized as anti-Semitic. On the 25th of February 2023, the German city of Frankfurt cancelled one of Waters' scheduled shows, calling him one of the most widely known anti-Semites and citing his support for BDS, the imagery at his shows, and his talks of the militant group Hamas. The move was supported by the Central Council of Jews in Germany and the Frankfurt Jewish community. Waters enlisted a German law firm to resist any further concert cancellations and released a statement denying the accusations and asserting that the cancellation could have serious, far-reaching consequences for artists and activists all over the world. I happen to agree. I would be surprised if Waters is sincerely bigoted toward Jewish people. Like, in his actions, I don't think if he happened to bump into a Jewish person on the street, he would treat them poorly. I think he is extremely critical of the state of Israel. I think he is very emotionally charged over that issue, and I think it makes him say angry, overgeneralized things from time to time, which isn't my excusing them, but it's me being willing to forgive them. What the problem is Waters is a public figure, and when someone like that, a revered artist, makes, like if Kanye West, when you say things like that, you validate other more horrible people into believing things which you don't even hold. You know, Waters would withhold, oh no, I don't believe this, this, and this. But because you're saying the initial this, this, and this, you're encouraging those people to, go further. And when you're a public figure, you need to be very careful with this sort of thing, because you may cause things to happen which you may not be directly responsible for, but you could be indirectly responsible for. You may, and if it's just a byproduct, you may claim, but it still has a connection to you. And there are events which, if you could prevent them, you would. So maybe you ought to take the first step and be careful what you say as a public figure. It is not a difficult issue to dance around. Just stay firm and true to your position, and don't get involved in any of this other speculative nonsense that, Waters is offering some speculative ideas based upon, without a huge amount of proof or evidence in some of these statements I've mentioned here. And to counteract, they're accusing him of bigotry based upon these statements. And while you may not be able to put two and two together absolutely, you can't blame people for being concerned, unfortunately, at times. A week before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Waters told an RT interviewer that rumors of Russia launching an attack was bullshit and anti-Russian propaganda. Waters subsequently stated after the invasion that US President Joe Biden was fueling the fire in the Ukraine. That is a huge crime, and questioned why the United States was not encouraging Ukraine to negotiate, obviating the need for this horrific, horrendous war. Responding to accusations that he was placing the responsibility to negotiate on the country that was invaded, Waters stated that Russia was merely responding to provocations from NATO. This war is basically about the action and reaction of NATO pushing right up to the Russian border, which they promised they wouldn't do when Gorbachev negotiated the withdrawal of the USSR from the whole of Eastern Europe. In another interview, Waters said the invasion of Ukraine was probably the most provoked invasion ever, and refused to see Russia from the current Russophobic perspective. On the 5th of September 2022, the day after Olena Zelenska, the First Lady of Ukraine, appeared on the BBC, Waters published an open letter to her. He argued that the West should not provide Ukraine with weapons, and that Western governments are prolonging the war with their support. He urged her husband to end the war based on the Minsk agreements. Waters' concerts in Poland were cancelled following his BBC appearance. In February 2023, at the Russian government's request, Waters gave a speech to the United Nations Security Council. He condemned the invasion of Ukraine in the strongest possible terms, but said it was not unprovoked, and that he also condemned the provocateurs in the strongest possible terms. The speech drew criticism from American, Ukrainian, and Albanian diplomats, but praise from Russia's deputy UN ambassador, Dmitry Polyansky. After the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and subsequent tsunami disaster, Waters performed Wish You Were Here with Eric Clapton during a benefit concert on the American network NBC. He criticised the Hunting Act of 2004 and supported the Countryside Alliance, but explained he was defending the right to hunt rather than supporting the activity himself. Waters explained that whether he supported hunting or not, it was important to defend it as a right. That's odd. I would like to hear Brian May have a conversation with him about that issue. In 2007, Waters became a spokesman for Millennium Promise, a non-profit organisation fighting poverty and malaria. That July, he participated in the American leg of the Live Earth concert aimed at raising awareness about global climate change. In 2015, Waters said that socialism was a good thing and called for socialised healthcare in the United States. Waters is supportive of veterans, which he partly attributes to the death of his father in World War II. He allocates a block of tickets for veterans at his shows. For a few years, he performed with a group of wounded veterans that was arranged through the United States National Military Medical Center. In 2012, he led a benefit for United States military veterans, Stand Up for Heroes, and invited a group of combat wounded veterans, Music Corps, to perform with him. Waters opposed Brexit, the UK leaving the European Union. Following the June 2016 referendum, which resulted in leaving the EU, he said, "I thought we were better than that. I was wrong." He criticised US President Donald Trump and his policies. In 2017, Waters condemned Trump's plan to build a wall separating the US and Mexico, drawing parallels to the wall. In 2018, Waters included Brazilian far-right presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro in a list of neo-fascists displayed on a big screen at his concert in Sao Paulo, which drew mixed responses from the crowd. In a concert in Rio de Janeiro that October, he acknowledged the murdered Brazilian councilwoman Marielle Franco and brought her daughter, sister and widow on stage. In 2019, Waters spoke at a rally outside London's Home Office, calling for the release of the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, and dedicated the performance of Wish You Were Here to him. The following year, he spoke at a rally in support of Assange outside Parliament in London. That's a cause that I can absolutely get behind. Good on you, Waters. Waters supports Stephen Donziger, an American lawyer embroiled in environmental litigation against Chevron Corporation, and has funded some of Donziger's legal fees. He endorsed for Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn in the 2019 UK general election, describing him as a beacon of hope. During his 2022 This Is Not a Drill shows, every US president from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump was labelled a war criminal, and a message was displayed that Joe Biden was just getting started. In August 2022, Waters said that Taiwan was part of China, and this had been absolutely accepted by the whole of the international community since 1948. In 1948, what we know as Taiwan now's government was still a government of China. That's the trivial point. Whatever, you're off by like a couple of years, but that's an issue. I'm fairly like, you do realize that China's not going to take Taiwan peacefully. That's a situation where preferably both countries can just call it quits, decide that they can, cut their pride. Their pride can take it and they can move on and not have to shoot anyone in the fucking head over it. How about that? Waters' primary instrument in Pink Floyd was the bass guitar. However, he said in 1992 that he was never a bass player and was not interested in playing instruments, and I never have been. Gilmour said that Waters used a limited and very simple bass style and had not been interested in improving, and that Gilmour had played many of the bass parts on Pink Floyd records. According to Mason in 2018, Waters feels that everything should be judged on the writing rather than the playing. Waters briefly played a Hofner bass but replaced it with a Rickenbacker RM 1999/4001S. In 1970, it was stolen along with the rest of Pink Floyd's equipment in New Orleans. He began using Fender Precision basses in 1968, originally alongside the Rickenbacker 4001, then exclusively after the Rickenbacker was lost in 1970. First seen at a concert in Hyde Park, London in July 1970, the Black P bass was rarely used until April 1972 when it became his main stage guitar. On the 2nd of October 2010, it became the basis for a Fender Artist Signature model. Waters endorses Rotosound Jazz Bass, 77 flat wound strings. He has used Selmer, WEM, Hiwatt, and Ashdown amplifiers, but used Ampeg for later tours. He has employed delay, tremolo, chorus, stereo panning, and phaser effects in his bass playing. Waters experimented with the EMS Synth A and VCS free synthesizers on Pink Floyd pieces such as On the Run, Welcome to the Machine, and In the Flesh. He played electric and acoustic guitar on Pink Floyd tracks using Fender, Martin, Ovation, and Washburn guitars. He played electric guitar on the Pink Floyd song Sheep from Animals, and acoustic guitar on several Pink Floyd recordings such as Pigs on the Wing 1 and 2, also from Animals, Southampton Dock from the Final Cut, and on Mother from The Wall. A Binson Echo Rec 2 echo effect was used on his bass-led track One of These Days. Waters plays trumpet during concert performances of Outside the Wall. In 1969, Waters married his childhood sweetheart Judith Trim, a schoolteacher and potter. She was featured on the gatefold sleeve of the original release of the Pink Floyd album Armagama, but excised from CD reissues. They had no children and divorced in 1975. Trim died in 2001. In 1976, Waters married Lady Caroline Christie, the niece of the third Marquess of Zetland. They had a son, Harry Waters, a musician who has played keyboards of his father's touring band since 2002, and a daughter, India Waters, who has worked as a model. Christie and Waters divorced in 1992. In 1993, Waters married Priscilla Phillips. They had a son, Jack Fletcher. Their marriage ended in 2001. In 2004, Waters became engaged to the actress and filmmaker Laurie Durning. They married on the 14th of January 2012 and filed for divorce in September 2015. Waters married his fifth wife, his former chauffeur, Camila Chavez, in October 2021. Wishing the best for both of them, sincerely. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm bottom of my heart. Waters has homes in Long Island and Hampshire. He's an atheist. Why would you... Here's my thing. Haven't you said people who live in mansions rub you the wrong way, AOD? They do. That's why I don't As if you don't just want to live in a modest little cottage after a while. I know your record collection's big. I don't know. Long Island? Like, really? Can't sell that? Just take the profits to Stephen Donziger? Hampshire's nice. Like, whatever. Like, a little modest English home. You don't have to live in, like, LA or New York or whatever. You're from the UK. Like, what do you need to, like, show off? You know, like, it's like, it's such a British Empire complex, too. It's like, we can't be just happy living in England. We've got to move to LA. That's how you know you've made it big. You know, screw just modest living. That's so absurd to me. I grew up on, like, English, like, you know, cartoon shows or, you know, or puppet shows, and the aliens come to visit the Earth and the UK, and they're like, this is how the world works. You know, the baker makes the bread, and the banker does the banking, and the blah, 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 blah. Yeah. We had a brief moment of 21st century optimism that was not dissimilar to what they considered the post-war consensus to be, I suspect. Anyway, I think I'll end it here. This video and the recordings have gone on for far too long now. Everyone is going to be hating on this. Why is this even a video? Just for something for people to listen to so they don't have to read the article while they paint the walls in their home. Thanks again, my friends.